Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the 29th episode of YCP's virtual series, Refiner's Fire. Every month, Catholic business leaders from diverse industries share spiritual and professional wisdom with us, all in short 30-minute live sessions. And in spite of the short length of these segments, we hope the tips and insights are really valuable for us as we seek to work and witness for Christ. The name of our series, Refiner's Fire, comes from scripture from Malachi, where we learn that God is like a refiner's fire who seeks to purify us and make us the best we can be. And that's the whole point of this series, that we can improve in small ways in our professional and spiritual lives. So our topic this month is how to deal with interpersonal issues in the workplace. We're going to discuss how a shared understanding of key behaviors in the workplace can improve collaboration and communication, and how this also carries over into evangelization. I can't think of a better person to speak on this topic than Andrew Ochalek. Andrew is the Vice President of Operations for the Evangelical Catholic, and before joining the EC, he worked for Heidrick and Struggles in leadership consulting, developing leadership solutions for global Fortune 500 companies. He lives in Madison with his wife and 3 children. So welcome, Andrew. We're so grateful to have you today.
Hey, thank you, Jen. I appreciate it. I have to say that I should give you a credit. I don't know if I ever told you this, but when you introduced me to the YCP Chicago crew, that allowed me to get plugged in with the right group of people that led me to my wife. So,
Oh, really?
I'd have to say, I think maybe our next child, if it's a girl, then your Jen might be in the running or something, because there's definitely some credit to that.
Oh, that's so nice. Well, you can do Guinevere because there's a saint.
Yeah.
Guinevere or Genevieve, that might be better. But that's so awesome. That's
Yeah.
so wonderful to hear. It's one of our favorite stories, is people coming together and meeting friends, coworkers, but especially spouses in this world. So Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for being here. So Andrew, you chose this topic, and I'm so curious why you chose this particular topic today and why you think it's relevant for young workers.
Yeah, I just think there's so much in our culture, so much in our political environment. So many things are kind of leading us to these interpersonal issues, these interactions that we're having with people. So I think, within this network, we focus more on the work side, the professional side of things, but you really can't get away from these relationships, these social interactions, no matter where you're at. And I just feel like even now, in light of COVID, the challenges that created, reading body language, the way we're interacting with people, moving to an environment that was much more virtual than we ever had experienced before. Even our political environment now, I feel like, sort of offers this guardedness that we hold on to ourselves, and it might create some challenges in the workplace, in the way we're interacting with people and formulating these deep connections in a way that Jesus wants us to be unified around. So I just think it's so relevant, but we run into more and more roadblocks that are preventing us from having these deep connections. So that's why I just think it's a really important topic. I think it's something that it's important for us to get ahead of, and important for us to always sort of be mindful as we approach our everyday work and our everyday interactions with people. And also, I think it just, as you sort of alluded to in the introduction, it relates so heavily to evangelization. I mean, we desire to be connected with people. We desire to be unified around Jesus. We desire for our Catholic faith to really shine in what we do. And that's all interactions with people, and the way we, offer ourselves to them, either one-on-one or in a small group setting or in a social larger setting. But I just think there's so much that relates to this area and this topic. So I think it's important to continue to have the conversation on it, and continue to allow ourselves to not be afraid to have these sort of dialogues and discussions around how to deal with interpersonal issues.
Absolutely. It's really so timely. So thank you so much. Can you provide, Andrew, some perhaps common examples of interpersonal challenges we might all encounter, and perhaps some suggestions for how to combat them?
Yeah, sure. So obviously it doesn't limit itself to the workplace, as I said, whether we're having a conversation with our spouse, our parents, our kids, even preparing for this call, we were just talking about the challenges with dealing with a toddler. It's it's not easy, and there's a relational component to all of it. So I just think everything we do is causing us to have these everyday interactions. But on the work front, obviously sales meetings, donor meetings, if you're in the nonprofit world, presentations on the marketing side, it all plays in to how we perceive ourselves and how we're representing ourselves and how we're interacting with other people. I think the areas for me that are most challenging, as it relates to these issues, are probably more around hiring the right staff member. Right? It takes time to hire the right person, and you want them to be a good fit. And if that's not a good fit, then it's going to create challenges later on down the road, and that's not doing you a good service or doing them a good service. I think in terms of if we have to let people go in the work environment, that is always just a really sensitive time. It's really edgy. And how do you go through with that? Anybody that has had to let somebody go for whatever reason understands the stress and the night's sleep that are lost just going through that, and really wanting to do a good service on the other person and really care and respect them, but having to have the necessary move of letting somebody go. Performance reviews, obviously with performance reviews, or whether it's annual or on a quarterly basis, anybody that's in a management position is experiencing that. But if you're having a performance review yourself, that is also going to, create some challenges. So, I think of just one in particular. When I was in the Marine Corps, I had this interview with the gunnery sergeant, which is a pretty high rank on the enlisted side. And I remember, he had a long career of performance reviews that were always solid, but he had some challenges, and nobody took the time to talk through those with him. And we did that on the performance review. And I was a very young officer coming in, and he's much older, much more seasoned. We had a great relationship going into the performance review. And in that conversation, just being very frank and very candid and preparing myself for that, being ready for that discussion, but not afraid to back away from that hard conversation and allow myself to do him a disservice. And sure, there was tension, and he was very upset at first. And then the follow on was just such gratitude for letting him know that, because nobody ever told him his weaknesses and areas that he was really struggling. And the result is our relationship was stronger than it had ever been before. So all that to say is I think we find ourselves in these situations, and we have a tendency of sort of backing away from them because we're afraid of that. But really, if we lean into it, it really helps us to create better relationships and better work efficiencies in the long run in the work environment.
I love that advice. And I think that's the second time you've said now, be not afraid. I think there's so much to that about sort of embracing the discomfort that comes with it, because it's for a higher reason, really, which is in the example you shared, which is care and concern for the other, removing yourself from it, the pride that might come from it, and really praying to discern, is there a sort of human weakness that's part of this, or is there really a care and concern for the other person? And then moving past the discomfort to do the right thing, which is to address it head on. Is that what you would say your practical advice is for most of these workplace situations?
Right. Yeah, that'll lead into it. One of somebody who supports the EC and Wisdom and Work had expressed, the hardest, what they learned in business is that successful people are the people that do things they don't want to do. And how many times are we in that work environment where we just don't want to have the conversation, or we don't want to address an issue, and we hold back? But if we lean into that, now you really are helping the other person, and you're helping your work environment. You're growing. There's just so much benefit in having that strength and having that candor and tact, but leaning into those situations with courage, though at the same time having grace for the person that you're having the conversation with, or the group of people that you're having the conversation with. So those are just things that we're all experiencing. But I think beyond that, we all hope as Catholics to have a sense of intentional discipleship making, some intentional evangelization, and why not bring that into the work environment? I know that's what you guys believe with YCP, and that's the foundation that you work off of. So we got to look at that as well, because we can't get away from these points of friction and these relationships. We can't get away from misunderstandings that happen over email or over text message or whatever the case is. So I just think it relates to our everyday work, and it relates to our mission as disciples to help bring other people to Jesus.
Completely. And can you build on that, Andrew? So tell us more about how this connects to our witness. Our slogan with YCP is working in witness for Christ. How does combating these challenges from a perspective of faith sort of relate?
Yeah. Well, I sort of the original question of like practically how do we use this in the work environment? I'll kind of use that to relate to the discipleship side, but just looking on the business side of things or on a professional side is, I just highly encourage finding some sort of business mentor, especially somebody who's a practicing Catholic. I know that you guys offer mentors as well, so I just highly encourage people to take advantage of that. I know personally, I have a mentor. I met with him this morning. And he holds me accountable to my goals in my career. He holds me accountable to my goals with my current job. He holds me accountable to my faith life and my personal life. And, you just need to have that sort of accountability because it's so easy to let it slip. Right. Yeah. So I would say just, have somebody who's holding you accountable. So let's say you're in a situation that you have to have a very tough conversation with an employee, especially if it's a performance review. Talking to your accountability mentor beforehand helps you to go in and ensure that you don't back down from the conversation that needs to happen. When we back down and sort of dilute the water a little bit, then again, we're falling into the step of not really helping the other person or helping ourselves in the situation. Interceding through prayer and fasting. So obviously on this discipleship side, investing in relationships and helping to discern our evangelization path, but carrying that over onto the business side as well. I mean, if you have to have a tough conversation with an employee or there's an issue that's happening, just spend some time praying through that. Even if you're experiencing dryness in your prayer and you just don't feel like the Holy Spirit's talking to you in a certain way or guiding down a certain path, you're still going to develop grace towards that individual. You're still going to develop empathy towards that individual. You're still going to walk into that conversation with a mindset that says, I care about them and not just, oh yeah, I'm going to show them that they need to do this. And this is where their improvement needs to change. Another part is just investing in relationships, obviously like build a network, utilizing YCP, utilizing coworkers. There's tons of groups out there, but build a network to help have these conversations with other people. Don't do it alone. I think another area that we've tried to do at the EC is really incorporate this into our everyday work. So I would say fight to incorporate this into your work culture. Our core values, one of them is candor. Another one, we look at all things to all people, but we're not afraid to have these conversations in our work environment. Sure, there are times that you might be less than perfect of really expressing what you want to say, but that doesn't mean we're not having conversations after the meeting or after the exchange to follow up and say, I know I said this, but this is really what I meant to say. Let's use the time to do that. So I would just say it's really, really important to try to fight it, to get it in your work culture. I know it's hard in order to, if you're not in a management position, to try to do that because you're not really in a position just to change the company's core values. But that doesn't mean you can't be aware of your own thoughts. Every meeting, just be a witness to your own thoughts. Sit down and say, how am I presenting myself? How is this coming across to other people in this meeting? You can still take different assessment tools. So we utilize predictive index. Strength Finders is another great one. I know Patrick Lencioni, they have one that they utilize as well. But I think there's just tons of tools out there that we can help to really understand ourselves, understand how we present ourselves to others, and not be afraid to continue our own education around those behaviors and interactions. I think just reflecting on my own self with the behavioral assessment that we took with predictive index, it became very clear to me that I'm very task oriented, not people oriented. I'd probably say I'm more Martha than Mary. I just like, I'm getting things done. We have a house party and I'm trying to like get the food, get this, get that, even though you have guests walking in the door. Where my wife's the opposite. She's greeting them, giving a hug. And I'm just so focused on getting the task done. And that prevents me from having these interactions with people. It prevents me from really showing people how much I care about them. So I have to be aware of it. I have to try to step myself out of that and just be really intentional about the way I approach these interactions with people.
Gosh, such great advice and so tied to our faith, about recognizing sort of how God has designed us and in a sense, working with him so that we can be as charitable as we can be, and as powerful as witnesses as we can. So that's great, Andrew. Just a reminder for all of our listeners, we will be taking questions live pretty soon here. So be thinking of your questions and go ahead and post them in the chat now. This is such a great conversation. Andrew, you mentioned this a little bit in your opening response, but I'm just curious your thoughts on why is this so challenging for young people today? You think about the fact that many times sort of saying things, even though it's difficult, really is the most charitable path forward with our coworkers, with our colleagues. But it's tough for us. I think we've grown up in this environment where, we have less practice, perhaps. So can you speak to some of that and just share any advice?
Yeah, I think we've all heard this before. I think screens have an impact. I think our desire to sit on a bus and look at our phone rather than have an awareness around other people. I think that all sort of plays into just the tweaks and the skill sets that we build over time that help us interact with people. To see that social interaction come into play, we have to put the screens down. We have to avoid just staying focused on ourselves. I'm kind of the type of, I get frustrated when you're at the grocery store and somebody's just got headphones on and they're walking around. You say, excuse me or something, and they don't even notice because they got their headphones on, right? So I think just what is socially acceptable has changed a lot.
Yes.
So we have to try to overcome that. I also think on that same note, there's a risk to taking a risk. With everything being recorded, everything being shareable instantaneously. It's just hard to have an interaction without thinking in a social environment, how is this going to go down? Is this being recorded? And is this going to come back to me in a lawsuit later on down the road? Right. It's kind of an extreme thought, but at the same time, it's not far-fetched to think that that's going to happen. I also think there's sort of a fear of not being liked as well because of this idea of always putting our best foot forward and having the ability to do that. It's easy to sort of build up this persona that you want people to see. And so how do we overcome that? I think we really just need to have the grace, the humility, the willingness to put ourselves out there.
Yes.
Especially in the work environment. I think if you're kind of going back to the thought that if you're in a situation that you cannot have direct influence, you're not in a management position or a leadership position, how can you still help overcome these interpersonal issues? How can you help sort of guide behaviors in the work environment? Again, there's the tools that you can introduce. Those will show you what your behaviors are. Those will help you get the culture around it. Core values are great, but if you can't go to that level, I think there's still the ability to just be vulnerable, put yourself out there, and be the person willing to be authentic in the conversation. The one willing to take a risk and say, this is how I really feel. Even if you're in a meeting and everybody else disagrees, don't be afraid to put yourself out there because people see that and they want to be more like that. I don't know if I'm assuming you've been in the same situation before, Jen, where you see somebody stand up for themselves in a courageous way. And even if it's against the stream, you're like, that is awesome. I have so much more respect for that individual.
Totally.
So I think it's just, we can do that more, whether it's in a work environment or at the grocery store or on a bus or whatever the case is. And then tying back to the whole being a Catholic witness and how can we influence people as our Catholic witness? I think, there's the professional mentor, but then there's also finding a spiritual mentor to help you overcome your spiritual battles that you're experiencing and help you grow spiritually. Within the EC, one of what we focus on is helping people to evangelize, leading people to understand, pursue their own personal apostolate. And in order to get to that point, you got to have a connection to Christ, right? So you really have to have intimacy built up with Jesus through your prayer life, through fasting, through sanctifying ordinary life. You're focusing on that foundation that you're building off of. And the same thing happens in the work environment. You got to focus on yourself, focus on understanding who you are, what your behaviors are, what organization you want to be a part of, and then how you can influence the environment that you're in. So I think that just sort of all ties to it. And even on the relationship level, right? How much are we taking the time to really have conversations that are centered on fun and joy and excitement, and really getting to know somebody, and having transparency, being authentic, just having all assumptions, all labels, set those aside, and really getting to know the other person and truly listening. So I think that's the only way we're going to build trust, and all of that just really relates to being a Catholic witness, and also excelling in your own career by being a role model of what it means to just be an authentic individual who's carrying out their everyday work.
It's such good advice. And I think it is, the whole thing is tied to our Catholic faith. I mean, a lot of it is really giving people the benefit of the doubt on a daily basis. And the best way we can do that is actually bringing things to light, right? Not kind of harboring things or sort of, letting things culminate until it gets to something much bigger. Part of charity and love is sort of addressing things in the moment, and sort of assuming the best. I mean, I think of, that very challenging scripture where it's so much easier for us to see the splinter in our neighbor's eye than the beam in our own. And so I think what you're saying is sort of really first rooting ourselves in prayer and asking for God to give us humility. That's really the first step in these interpersonal challenges that we will increasingly encounter because of the way the world is set up today. So thanks for this awesome advice. I'm so curious to see what our questions are from our audience. So let's do it. All right, from Veronica. Hi, Andrew. Any tips and tricks to keep things authentic and real with coworkers when working remotely?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we do at our office is we try to at least once a month have a happy hour. And we play a game over Zoom, and then we just have dialogue, have discussion around video. And what that does is it allows us to have conversations outside of our projects, outside of our work. It allows us to sort of like relax a little bit and get to know somebody beyond just that professional environment. So I would say I would highly encourage you to try to provide more opportunities to have those conversations. Spontaneous phone calls are always great. Zoom's awesome, but spontaneously calling somebody and just letting them know that they've done a great job, or you've had a work accomplishment that's worth sharing. But anything that you can do to try to step away from like the day-to-day project and task, because if you don't, that's the only way that they know you. Right. So how do we put ourselves outside of that situation and really show somebody a side of who we are that's beyond just the task or the role that you're performing within the everyday work?
Yeah. I'm curious, Andrew, with your employees and your teammates, do you encourage them regularly? I know your culture, as you mentioned, is candor, one of your values, but I mean, do you encourage them in these spontaneous conversations to share with you things that are sort of on their hearts and minds, and just sort of how they're feeling? Does that come naturally?
I think that there's always work because of the busyness to it, right? Yeah. When we're really busy, it's easy to let that go. I know, just one example, one of our deacons, he does more of our mission advancement, our sales side of things. And he was on the road, got this really cool rental car pickup truck that he wasn't supposed to have, but it was like an F-350. So that's already a cool story worth sharing. But he's riding over to a diocese to have some meetings. And he had a night before that was worth sharing. So he just on the phone, gave me a call, said, don't even say anything. Just want to let you know I'm driving this really cool F-150 and I'm headed to a diocese and yada, yada, yada. But it was fun because then I went through whatever I was going in the day to having this uplifting experience.
That's awesome.
And I remembered it enough that months later, I'm still sharing the details of the conversation because it stamped into my mind as just a good moment. So yeah, I think it's just the spontaneity of it all can really add to it.
That's so great. All right, let's see what other questions we have. Emma, any advice for someone who is conflict averse in facing the challenging conversations in the workplace? Are there any specific prayers or saints that have helped you? Great question.
Yeah, I think this really goes to the, for me personally, I would focus more on the fasting aspect of this. I think I would take some time to really fast for the individual, fast for the cause, before trying to address the person, before trying to jump in right away. I would probably take a week or two and just every day praying through what that relationship looks like. What are the conversations, ensuring that it's something that I was identifying as an issue between me and the individual, and not my own issue that is somehow being portrayed as something else. So, I would first just kind of take that approach. Don't be quick to make a decision. Even when we send emails out, how often do we regret an email that we could have worded it better? So I would just say be patient with it. And then the other part that I would add is do the best that you can to meet the person where they are at, not necessarily trying to bring them up to the level that you are, right? Mm-hmm. So if it's somebody who has who likes to avoid conflict, do they communicate in a different way? I think of even our own staff. If I'm in a meeting, confront me on whatever you want, and I'm going to position myself to provide an answer the best that I can, but I'm probably going to have the same answer then as if it was sent in an email later on down the road.
Right.
Other staff members, they're going to be completely quiet during the staff meeting, and then they're going to follow up with an email later on that's really showing them, showing us what their opinion is. And we try to avoid that, right? But at the same time, people are just used to different approaches.
Yeah.
I would also look at, maybe it's better addressing that person with an email first and then follow up with conversation versus having the conversation and following up with an email after that. So I would just do the best that you can to try to meet the person where they're at. Is there a reason why they're sort of avoiding the conflict, but try to better understand how they work, how they operate, and then communicate in that method.
I think that's such good advice, because again, it's all about charity and love. And yeah, I also think it takes practice. I mean, so much of this is, if you are someone who's conflict averse or it doesn't come naturally to you, I think you may just have to kind of try and see how it goes over time. I just remember in my own journey, with leadership, in general, and with YCP, there were so many things at the beginning that were extremely uncomfortable for me. But, I just had to push through. And I think part of it is with interpersonal relations, we kind of have to push through again, because we have to be able to communicate and share as part of our path to heaven, right? And to do good work together. So I think what I would say too is just try and know that it's going to be difficult, but the more you practice, the better it will be. And I think you can also tell the person openly that you're trying to speak with, look, this isn't coming naturally for me, so be patient.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Don't you think people really appreciate that?
Yeah, and I've done that plenty of times myself. Like, just I'm going to recognize that this is going to be an awkward conversation, and I don't feel comfortable doing this, but we got to have the conversation anyways. And to your point, Jen, if we're not intentional about this, if we're not sharpening ourselves around this, we're going to default to taking our own methods,
right?
Similar to the love languages, right? Whatever your love language is, if you're not intentional about the other person's, you're just going to go with your own.
Yeah,
and that totally fits into all of this as well. So that there's an art of conversation, and you need to try to study that art. Otherwise, you're never going to overcome some of these challenges that you face with other people.
Andrew, this has been such a great conversation, so relevant, so practical, and also so incorporating our faith. So I'm really grateful. Thank you so much, Andrew. We're so thankful.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's great to continue to be plugged in with the YCP community. So you guys are doing great things. It's fun to see.
Thanks again. See you soon, Andrew.